Hear that? That's the sweet sound of thousands of people marching through central London, demanding urgent action on the climate crisis. While that sound may for now be a distant memory, activists around the world have been finding creative ways to keep the movement alive from the confines of their own homes. Hello and welcome to the first episode of Hot and Bothered, a new podcast series produced by Drive Docs. I hope everyone's well and keeping safe. We're currently enduring our third national lockdown here in England, and let's be honest, 2021 isn't off to a cracking start, so hopefully this podcast can shed some positivity on your day as we meet the passionate activists behind the placards who are set on making change. You don't need to have written a book on climate change or organised a protest to be in this movement. I know it can sometimes feel intimidating for people who want to get involved, but we're all learning, and hopefully this podcast can shed some light on that and show that anyone can make a difference. My name is Chris Healey and I'm an independent documentary filmmaker. I've been following the climate justice movement for a few years now, and I've interviewed over 100 activists and documented some of the Extinction Rebellion demonstrations from London to New York and LA. In this first episode of the series, we'll be revisiting conversations that I had with some incredible activists from the first lockdown back in May last year. The discussion focuses on how the movement had to adapt to a digital platform as the world went into quarantine and social distancing regulations came into play. So, as placards were replaced by Zoom backgrounds and chants were replaced by the pings of Twitter, I was curious to see how the movement would stay afloat and what activists were doing around the world to continue raising the alarm. Throughout the episode, you'll hear from Vanessa Nakate in Uganda about the limitations of technology in Africa and the implications of that in an online movement.
The climate crisis has not gone into lockdown. The climate crisis is not on vacation. It is still here and we need to address it.
Malati Weisen will join us from Bali in Indonesia to tell us about her creative ways to keep the momentum up.
We really had to adapt and kind of be creative, follow what the rest of the world was also doing, and start to see how we could mobilize our movement, continue our story online.
We'll be joined in the conversation by Kevin Patel in Los Angeles to discuss the situation across the pond. And my good friend and local activist, George Coombs, will also be joining us from Manchester in England. So let's dive in. Grab yourself a coffee and enjoy the episode. We'll hear from George first, and I asked him how he'd been getting on throughout the lockdown.
So my full-time job I've been carrying on, so that's been really exciting because I'm in a campaigning role, supporting students. That's been really interesting, but obviously my volunteer work as well. So I volunteer with the UK Youth Climate Coalition, and I started that probably it's about a year ago now. So I started that in May 2019, where I joined the team from sort of like a project point of view, working to create the first ever local conference of youth, which was almost an international conference that a lot of people were doing, which was linked to the UN's climate structures. And the whole point of it really is to elevate the voice of young people across the entire world, and for them to address and understand how climate justice is something we really need to be talking about when we talk about climate change. But that was an amazing conference that I did in November, and obviously you were so lucky to be there as well, hosting, actually being on a panel discussion, which thank you for being there. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, so now I sit with the wider team, so I work with the communications team and the community team, and it's been hectic because we basically, we're building upon campaigns that have either been launched and locked down or started beforehand, and how we can actually adapt that on a digital platform and make, how would you make a climate strike virtual? It's been a really interesting conversation to have at the moment. Because the climate emergency isn't gone. Like, it's not just disappeared. It's, whilst, COVID and the climate emergency are linked, they're also very separate issues that we need to actually take into account. Because there's been a lot of conversations I've seen around, there's been a graphic that literally was launched the other day, and even though I thought it was interesting and it's relevant to share, it was one of, COVID as a wave that was hitting a city, and then there was the recession behind it, which is obviously coming, and then there was the climate emergency right behind that. And whilst that is an interesting thing to actually look at in the sense of, there's a lot of people discussing that whilst COVID is one problem, the climate emergency is still present, and therefore it's still looming, and we need to understand that it's quite a large issue that we need to address continually. If you actually take away the enormous nature of what COVID is doing and the impact it's having on our society, then you're almost completely disowning and reducing the deaths that the people have gone through and the hardship people have gone through as COVID and the pandemic as to nothing, and say, well, that's great, but also it's not as important as the climate emergency. You can't just push these people under the carpet as if they're
of course.
So it's been really interesting to move to a digital platform and actually see how we can engage with people and try and build a climate network and movement that is still active and alive, but people have quite rightly had other issues to focus on. So it's natural for the movement to sort of stutter, almost, I think is the appropriate word, as it starts to sort of navigate different areas of how we deal with COVID.
Vanessa Nakate joined the conversation remotely from Uganda and continues this point. Vanessa is an amazing activist who has campaigned alongside the likes of Greta Thunberg and was recently quoted in an article by The Independent saying, "A 2-degree hotter world is a death sentence for countries like mine."
Already with the pandemic, it was hard to get the climate message going because people were so focused on the pandemic, on the updates from the pandemic. People wanted to know if there were any new cases, if there were any new recoveries. People wanted to find out what was happening, how they were going to open the states and the different countries. Even the media itself was so focused on the coronavirus pandemic. But now that we have so many protests going on in the United States of America, now these protests have also taken over media. They have taken over social media. Everywhere you see Black Lives Matter, George Floyd protests and all that. So the climate movement, in some way, it has been pushed aside by the two, I could call them events or happenings that are taking place right now.
I was interested to find out how technology had aided the movement in adapting to the situation around the pandemic, and if any, what kind of benefits have come from this digital shift.
Yeah, and I think it's probably one of the devices we're using right now. Like, Zoom has been quite a tool that has been used in the climate movement for a while now. Its ability to be able to grab people from all over the world to join these conversations. And it's not something new, but it wasn't the norm, in the sense that if we look at the climate movement especially, it's a global and international movement where we understand that the issues that are facing people across the globe are similar, but also it's recognizing the fact that people in what we class as Western countries, and therefore the global North, are not going to be as negatively impacted on climate change, or not as quickly as the global South are. So we've got countries who are in areas, let's take somewhere, in Eastern Asia, where we're already seeing islands disappear because of rising sea levels. We're already seeing, cataclysmic weather conditions such as hurricanes and typhoons that are tearing down these little islands that aren't really prepared for them whatsoever because the infrastructure isn't there. And that is a complete result of climate change and, the aggressive acceleration of our temperatures and our weather conditions. So by having a digital platform, we're able to communicate with people across the globe and actually understand more in depth what the differences and the separations are between someone's understanding of the climate movement in London versus someone's understanding of the climate movement in, Bali. It's a completely different conversation, but it's relevant nonetheless. So the climate movement has always been involved at looking at how something quite visual and present as a climate strike can be versus actually how we can then link together and start talking on digital platforms. So I found it funny when people were like, oh, what's this Zoom thing that's just cropped up? When actually it's been in my life for a lot longer than other people. But you're right in saying, how do we then turn those physical climate strikes, and then how do we create the same essence of what it is on a digital platform and a face-to-face versus a face-to-face value? And the article I wrote not so long ago, which the whole point of the article, which was comparing how mutual aid groups and community organising is something that is important across both the COVID pandemic and also across the climate movement. The whole point of that was to instill a bit of confidence in people that the two are not so different, and that we can really start to develop this level of confidence and from seeing the fact there is similarities between the two. But I think once we actually look at the amount of people who are volunteering and going out there and willing to give their time and support to help their community, it started to create a bit of a resurgence of people getting involved in the climate movement again, and actually looking at how we can create a wider climate network by using digital and virtual conversations, but also how we can then go, right, well, what's a climate movement look like and what's a climate strike look like when you put it on a Zoom call? And there was a really cool campaign, which was, it was Canadian based, but it was supported by other international countries. And it was fighting back against the Canadian government overriding sort of communities who were basically being exploited, and oil companies were taking away their homes, and it was disastrous. And this was before actual COVID pandemic, but what happened is basically they bombarded their sort of like their help assistants and the oil company's website by sending them information and sending them questions and just bombarding them electronically with information. Now that's a massive form of activism, and that's a really strong campaign. But we can learn a lot from that and how you transfer that to a climate strike as well, because it's ways of actually saying, well, can we be present together, but not actually be present in the same room? Can we be present on a Zoom call and target our locations in one area? Can we have the same conversations? Can we spread the same message? So whether the noise of a climate strike has been replaced by the pings of Twitter and Instagram notifications, it's still the same sound that you would feel and still the same excitement you would feel when you're standing there in an environmental atmosphere. And you know, it's a bit of an interesting one. But it's been alive and well, I would say. It's not shifted negatively. I think a lot more people are rising to the challenge to see what we can do more.
I asked Vanessa how the coronavirus lockdown restrictions had affected the movement throughout Africa.
Well, we as activists, of course, we followed the guidelines of WHO, and those were to stay at home and to carry out social distancing to stop the spread of the virus. So we stopped striking from outside and we took the strikes online. And how we do it, we carry out climate strikes online by taking photos with our placards and then sharing them on social media, that is Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or any other social media someone has. And then we take part in making videos sending off a message. For example, we, the activists in Uganda, were running video campaigns where I would say maybe you don't have to engage in grand heroic actions to participate in the process of change. And we were sharing these videos on all social media and telling people that the climate crisis has not gone into lockdown. The climate crisis is not on vacation. It is still here and we need to address it. And then there have been quite a number of webinars that have been organized by the Fridays for Future movement and also other organizations. So we've been able to take part in some of those online events to continue spreading the message of the climate crisis.
Well, last year we saw millions of people marching all over the world in support of the climate justice movement to raise awareness. And then fast forward to today, and we've got 1.7 billion people under lockdown, approximately. So those people that would have been on the streets, not all of them have access to internet now. Are their voices still being heard?
Well, I agree with you when it comes to that, especially in developing countries like mine. For example, for us, it wasn't so easy to do massive strikes. So some of the ways that we would do strikes would be by going in schools and doing the strikes within schools and talking to students in schools. But now that schools are closed, that is impossible. And you find that not every student has a phone. It's more like an African setting. Students usually get phones maybe at when they turn 18 or when they turn 20. So it's kind of different in the African countries. So not every student has access to a phone, and even those who have access to phones. Not all of them have access to internet. This is because of the high data rates, that is internet rates. They are very expensive, and not all of them can afford to be able to take part in online events or to share videos or to live stream on maybe the Fridays for Future accounts or any other accounts that are running like 24-hour live streams. So you find that not everyone is able to access the internet, those who have phones, and then you find that those without phones, they are completely cut off from saying anything. So not all of their voices are being listened to at this point. But we who have the access to the phones and to the internet, we are doing as much as possible to represent and keep telling their stories and sharing the work that they are doing, and also talking about the climate issues in our countries, in the African continent, so that they feel represented, in that even when they're not speaking, they know that someone else is speaking, and that is what we are doing.
I was also joined in the conversation by Kevin Patel for an insight into the situation in the United States. Kevin is a first-generation Indian Asian American, Los Angeles-based youth climate justice activist.
The COVID-19 crisis has drastically changed the climate movement in the sense of we've had to switch, we've had to adapt a lot. We're no longer able to do systematic action in the streets. We're now having to meet up online and join and do campaigns via online and really push our politicians, do call-ins and do strategies that we've never done before, at a limited before we did it at a limited range because we were able to do systematic actions on the streets, but now we're doing it even more than before. And so we see, like you said, you're seeing young people join Zoom calls, do webinars, go on Instagram, using TikTok, using all these social media platforms to really get our voices out there, to really get the message out there that, the coronavirus has exposed the systems. Now it is our time to really act. This is a pivotal moment to saying, the whole world is at a halt. We are going to combat this crisis. We're going to have to combat it a sustainable way, or even change our whole mindset and really be like, we need to change the entire system. Even though we've had to switch and we've had to adapt so much, we, in the sense, is like we've gotten to connect with a lot of people around the world. I've been able to meet many, many young activists I wouldn't have ever been able to meet while only being in LA, but I've been able to meet people in Australia, in India, and Africa, and all these activists that are being able to be connected via online, which is amazing, and seeing what initiatives they're taking within their own countries. And so even within their own states, because I've been able to meet a lot of young activists from across the United States. So that's just been amazing for me. So there is a downside in the sense of that we're not able to really go and, gather together and be together and stand in solidarity together. But there is a good side out of it. There's something that's coming out of it saying that we're able to connect with one another via online, and it's been able to really awaken our senses and saying like, hey, there's now this, and then what if, when we do, and we are going to go back to society, and when that day comes, we have to come even harder and really, push for the change that we want to see.
Let's head across to Bali now, where we'll hear from Malati Weisen about the creative ways that activists are continuing to keep the movement active online. Malati has achieved some amazing results in her activism dedicated to cleaning up the plastic pollution around the island. She's the founder of both Bye Bye Plastic Bags and Youthtopia, which are definitely worth checking out.
We're so used to doing in-person meetings, workshops, gatherings, trainings. A large part of our work, revolved around in-person contact, really, storytelling right in front of these, young kids, telling them the story of plastic pollution, or meeting with government, sitting directly across and having a meeting. And then COVID-19 happened and all of that had to change. So we've really had to adapt and kind of be creative, follow what the rest of the world was also doing, and start to see how we could mobilize our movement, continue our story online. And we've been doing a lot of different challenges or sort of campaigns online, virtual challenges. We did a really successful one, which was called the Bioplastic Bags Climate Lockdown Challenge, where basically for a duration of 14 days, each day, people who had signed up would get a climate task or an eco task that they could comfortably accomplish from their homes, from their living rooms, just using simple things that we knew everybody had, whether that was, making a meal from your leftovers and kind of learning more about food waste, learning more about how you could make a DIY mask or things like that. And it was really successful, but, again, an important space that we really had to create for our movement to ensure that people were still talking about things like plastic pollution. So that's really important, and we continue trying to find creative ways every day.
As we came close to the end of this conversation, I was interested to see what George thought this digital shift would mean for the future of the movement, and whether activists would continue with their online strikes, or whether there would be a resurgence in physical marches.
If we look at the amount of people who've rallied together and on a digital platform, but then reiterated the concept of community, it's almost taking back what people have said all along, where there has been an element of fear when it comes to technology, in the sense that it is actually going to be counterproductive to society, and it's going to destroy the concept of community, because you always get the people who say the kids are always looking at the phones, and that that's fair enough, because the majority of the time people now have a platform to be able to communicate with their mates without actually being face to face and having those conversations. But as we've just said, it's clear to see that people have rallied together on a digital platform and on social media that is about the same issues they would have done if they were at a climate strike and if they were part of the climate movement, before COVID started. But it's all rallied together, and we've really just defined the concept of what community is online as much as it is when you're near your area, or when you're standing and clapping on a Thursday night at 8:00, or when you're coming together with your friends and family. And the second thing really is the fact that I think people won't take it for granted as so much anymore. And that's something a lot of people are saying, when you're taking, what week are we on now? I don't have a clue, like 11 or 12. When you've had that long period where you've not been able to just be around other people without the fear that you're either doing something wrong or it's actually dangerous for you or your family, people are going to be able to go out and actually enjoy being in the presence of thousands of other young people, other people rallying together and supporting this. But your question about whether it's actually going to be as important and people are going to get involved as much anymore, we've got the data and we've got the information that we know it is important. So there was a report online that I saw via Twitter where someone basically isolated and said, since lockdown, whilst we've seen, air pollution rapidly drop, we've seen ecosystems start to regain a bit of strength, and we've seen, nature really start to take hold. If you look at the carbon emissions and the data we have from the start of lockdown to where we are right now, it's actually only met what we need for the Paris Agreement round about now. Now, I don't have the full data or the full report, but the outline of that is quite shocking to say that it's not just about everyone stopping what they're doing for us to actually be able to, to recover the planet and take care of our ecosystems and our environment more so. It goes to show that what we need to do is we need to continue to lobby, we need to continue to be part of this climate movement, and therefore keep fighting back at establishments that say, this isn't about us, this is about the other billions of people that need to take command. Well, we've got proof now that it's not. You can have a resurgence of your ecosystems and your air quality, but if we're going to change everything else that's involved in climate change that affects our globe and our natural world, then it needs to be coming from the polluters and the large organizations and companies that are clearly making more damage than the billions of people who are just stuck at home doing nothing right now. It's the carbon footprint, which is so much bigger than the masses. So yeah, I think people are going to be a lot more involved.
And there we have it. I hope you've enjoyed this first episode, and if you'd like to hear more from us in the future, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I want to thank the activists who've joined me remotely to make this episode possible, and make sure you give them a follow on social media to stay up to date with all the amazing work they're doing. You can also find us on social media with the handle @DriveDocs. Look out for our next episode in the series, where I'll be seeing how activists have stayed inspired throughout the lockdown.
The greatest inspiration for me comes from the fact that there are quite a number of activists from different parts of the world. To me, it's a form of solidarity to see that many young people from different parts of the world are working together to reach the same vision, to reach the same goals, and to see the change that we are all seeking for. So that is already an inspiration to know that as an activist, I am not working alone, and that there are quite a number of activists from different parts of the world who are demanding for action from the government leaders.
This is a podcast for Drive Docs and was hosted and stitched together by me, Chris Healey. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. In the meantime, stay safe.